was in charge of the Department of Governmental Efficiency, known as DOG. He personally fired thousands upon thousands of federal workers, citing incompetence and other unfounded truths. Now that they're fired, the Trump administration scrambles to rehire key federal workers. Tyrone Bowman live. Let's talk about it. According to CNN, an article written by Eric Brainer, federal agencies are rehiring and ordering back from leave some of the employees who were laid off in the weeks after President Donald Trump took office as they scrambled to fill critical gaps in services left by the Department of Government Efficiency-led effort to shrink the federal workforce. The Trump administration's quiet backtracking from the firings and voluntary retirements, which are also paired with new hires to fill vacancies, these departures created come as federal agencies are still implementing their, quote, reduction in force, end quote, plans as part of a push for spending cuts. Experts warn that even though the Trump administration has backtracked on some of its efforts to shrink the federal workforce, the rapid rehirings are a warning sign that it has lost more capabilities and expertise that could prove critical and difficult to replace in the months and years ahead. That's what happens when you brought in these ill-prepared, unlearned computer know-it-alls. Young people who just came in with their arrogance, their narcissism, their narcissistic ways and pride. Quote, there are time bombs all over the place in the federal government because of this, said Elaine Kamarek, the director of the Center for Effective Public Management at the Brookings Institution. They've wreaked havoc across nearly every agency, end quote. Some government employees' firings were halted by courts, but other moves to reinstate federal workers come as the Trump administration faces pressure from lawmakers, industries, and groups they serve. Quote, President Trump pledged to make our bloated government more efficient by slashing waste, fraud, and abuse. The administration is committed to delivering on this mandate while rectifying any oversights to minimize disruption to critical government services, close quote. White House spokesman Kush Dizia said. No, they messed up. That's the bottom line. You can use all the flowery platitudes that they want to use. They messed up, they screwed up, and now they're trying to save face and they're trying to fix it. But you know what? A lot of them are not going to come back because they've been insulted, they've been humiliated, their reputations have been trashed, their records have been scorched, and so many other inhumane things have been said about them. And now they want them to come back and clean up the mess that Elon Musk and his cronies created. Many of them should not come back. Earlier this month, as Israel's conflict with Iran escalated, Voice of America called back dozens of Farsi speakers who had been on paid administrative leave since March. Those staffers at its Persian language services were among hundreds who were then laid off again the next week as the Trump administration gutted the network. Let me tell you something about me. I've been fired from so many jobs, I can't even count. And you know what? I never even thought about going back when they asked me to come back. Once you fire me, we're done, we're finished, kaput, we're not even friends, we are enemies. It's war, bottom line. I'm not coming back to work for you. I don't want to talk to you. I don't want to be around you. We have no conversation. We're not friends. We'll never be friends. That's the bottom line. With hurricane season looming, the National Weather Service, which lost more than 560 employees to layoffs and early retirement incentives earlier this year, received permission to hire about 125 new meteorologists and specialists for its forecast offices around the country despite a federal hiring freeze. Those hires will help staff offices that had to cut back on their hours or stop staffing the overnight shift. What? Let them figure it out for themselves. Why would you want them to? Why would people want to come back to a place that despises them? Some people really think that we here in America are really stupid. That we're that desperate for a dollar. You're going to insult us. You're going to malign us. You're going to trash us. You're going to call us every name under the sun, fire us, then say, oh, by the way, we don't want to call it rehiring. We don't want to call it reconsidering, um, but we need you to come back. Would you do that for us? The Department of Health and Human Services reinstated 450 employees at the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, who were fired as part of a massive reorganization in April, including workers focused on HIV and childhood lead exposure. Well, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is the one that fired him in the first place. He tried to tell him he didn't know what he was doing, but he didn't want to hear it because everything is a hoax with him. Everything is a misnomer. He's supposed to be the smartest person in the room. Meanwhile, he was the one that had a 20-year plus cocaine addiction habit. You think I'm going to trust him? Not happening. Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. said in May that the department had also reinstated 328 workers at the CDC's National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health focused on mine safety. Why don't you just say we made a mistake? Oh, I get it. People in power are too prideful to apologize because they think they are omnipotent, that they're without fault, they're without error. They don't want to admit that they made a mistake, but they want the underlings and their subordinates and those who are quote unquote beneath them to grovel at their feet and beg for a job. They should have never been fired. Humility is the way to greatness. Never forget that. Those employees combined represent about 1/3 of the 2,400 workers whose jobs HHS eliminated as part of its reduction in force plan as the Trump administration slashed the size of the federal workforce. More than 200 employees had their firings rescinded at the CDC's National Center for HIV, Viral Hepatitis, STD, and Tuberculosis Prevention, along with 158 at the National Center for Environmental Health. An HSS spokesperson confirmed another 71 were brought back in the office of the director and 24 more at the Global Health Center. What is going on here? Why are all these people being rehired if they were so sure that there was waste and fraud the way that they claim? The cuts had wiped out the CDC's childhood lead poisoning prevention and surveillance branch as it was in the midst of helping Milwaukee address a lead exposure crisis in its public schools. The firings meant that the CDC had to deny a request from the city for specialists to help. The entire lead team was rehired, along with its parent group, the Division of Environmental Health Science and Practice, according to its newly reinstated director, Dr. Eric Singh. Other rehirees are similarly driven by specific government services that were gutted by the initial layoffs. The Food and Drug Administration rehired more than a dozen scientists at a food safety lab in Illinois. The Department of Agriculture halted plans to lay off 25% of its staff at 58 facilities responsible for responding to bird flu, which had driven up the price of eggs. Federal agency heads are also blocking some plans to lay off their employees. Senator Lisa Murkowski, who was concerned about plans to slash 10% of the Indian Health Services staff, said in a New York Times interview that Kennedy called her to say he was personally blocking those cuts. Whoop-de-doo. Quote, he called me up to say they told me that I was supposed to find 10% cuts across the board for IHS, and I told them I wouldn't do it. The IHS has chronically been underfunded, and we cannot go backward, and I'm not going to do that, the Alaska Republican said, end quote. In February, the Trump administration fired and then the next day rehired more than 300 probationary employees at the National Nuclear Security Administration, the agency within the Department of Energy tasked with managing the nation's nuclear stockpile. Sources told CNN at the time the Trump administration officials responsible for the decision did not seem to know this agency oversees America's nuclear weapons. After HSS let go of the entire team that handles the Low Income Home Energy Assistance Program, or LIHEAP, in early April, the agency had to rehire one longtime employee for 2.5 weeks to run a critical formula needed to distribute more than $400 million to states, said Mike Wolf, executive director of the National Energy Assistance Directors Association. The dismissal of more than a dozen LIHEAP staffers raised concerns among state officials and lawmakers who feared HHS would not send out this final tranche of fiscal year 2025 funding. Some states were depending on receiving this money to help residents cool their homes this summer, since the states had already exhausted their prior appropriations on the heating season. The agency announced at the end of April that it was releasing the remaining LIHEAP money. Wolf, however, remains concerned about how HHS will handle the distribution of any fiscal year 2026 funds that Congress may appropriate, since the agency will not handle any experienced LIHEAP staffers. Doing so, quote, requires skills, requires knowledge about the program, end quote, he said. Scott Langley, a National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health epidemiologist who received notice he was being replaced on administrative leave, but was then called back, told CNN. There is still a lot of chaos sort of throughout the federal workforce, but he said he is more concerned about coal miner safety. If protections in places for decades are cut, Langley said it's certain that people will die earlier, that people will die in mining accidents and roof collapses, all sorts of the work that we do to prevent injury and illnesses and mining more broadly across the United States. Max Steyer, CEO of the Partnership for Public Services, said the moves to eliminate and reinstate many federal workers, quote, shows the mosaic of incompetence and a failure on the part of this administration to understand the critical value that the breadth of governmental expertise provides, end quote. Quote, this is not about a single incident. It's about a pattern that has implications for our government's ability to meet not just the challenges of today, but the critical challenges of tomorrow, end quote, Steyer said. This is a deep story. Let's go to the comment section. Anthony said, damn, bro, that's how you feel? Yep. He says, go off, Queen. These guys are a joke. Well, pardon me, this guy's a joke. That's an, okay. Laya said, you look very, no, you said the word gay. So what's your issue? You hate gay people? So you're LGBTQ you're one of the MAGA haters that hate gay people. You probably got gay people in your family. Some of your friends are probably gay. So what about my look? I look the way I want to look. It's my prerogative. See, one thing about you all in the comment section, you can't intimidate me. You cannot bully me. You can't stop me from talking. You can't drive me away. I'm going to do what I do, and I'm going to do it very well. Never surrender. Never quit.